Oh, good. Okay, I'm letting them all in.
Yeah.
Hello, hello. Hello. Hello, welcome. We're gonna just let everybody get situated and then we'll get started.
Sounds good.
Give us a minute or two more. We just want to make sure everybody who's coming tonight can get in, and then we will be getting started. Looks like we're pretty good to go. Okay, let's get started. Good evening. Welcome to Colourwork Continued. This is our 14th or 15th. Hang on, just need to move a window. This is our 15th Tutorial Tuesday, which is sponsored by Zen Yarn Garden. And they produce lovely, lovely yarns. And we have a coupon code for you, which is COLOR, C-O-L-O-R. And that will be good for 48 hours from tonight on zenyarngarden.com if you are interested in purchasing any of the kits that we are sharing tonight, or any of the grab bags or any other yarn. So we'll be adding that in the chat window, and you can use that at any time today or in the next 48 hours. So welcome, my name is Laura. I am a sample knitter for Zen Yarn Garden. I am joined by Nick, who will be here helping us with tutorials tonight. She's going to demonstrate some stitches for us. And Roxanne, the dyer behind Zen Yarn Garden, is also here. She'll probably reach out a hand and wave hello. She's in the screen with the coupon code. So last week we explored Colourwork Part 1, and we talked about some easy ways to add color to your knitting. That is through stripes or color blocking. And then we also talked a little bit about intarsia or picture knitting. So tonight we're going to focus on the other two forms of color work. One is mosaic or slip stitch knitting, and the other is stranded color work. So what is mosaic or slip stitch knitting? It looks complicated, but it's actually very, very easy. In mosaic knitting or slip stitch knitting, what you are doing is knitting with one color at a time and slipping the stitches of the other color. So there are lots of examples of this. As I said, it can look much more complicated than it actually is, because on any row, for instance, on this row, I was working with the dark green and slipping the other handspun yarn. This is the Nightshift Shawl. This happens to be a version in my handspun, but there is a kit available from Zen Yarn Garden with all the colorways you'll need. And another sample that I brought to show you some mosaic knitting is Casapinka. We are doing a knit along right now on the Rainbow Warrior Shawl, and Nick will be showing you some of that, and also showing you a little sample of how that is done in just a moment. But I knit a lot of the samples for Zen Yarn Garden, so I knit a sample for Rainbow Warrior and sent it back so they could photograph it. So this is actually a different Casapinka shawl. This is Albuquerque Sunset, and all of these sections are also mosaic and slipped stitches, creating the wonderful patterns. So I'm going to turn it over to Nick, who's going to talk to you a little bit about how you would knit mosaic or slip stitch knitting.
Hello, everyone. I apologize if ever I'm delayed. My internet has been going wonky all night, so I will try to keep up as best I can. All right. As Laura was telling us, mosaic knitting is, after stripes, is one of the easiest ways of doing color work. As we can see here in my Rainbow Warrior shawl, which is not finished yet, my bad. In my defense, our knit along is barely finished. We see here, which is probably the simplest way of doing mosaic knitting, which is a grid. And that is what I'm going to demo for you right away to show you how simple it actually is. Now, I'm going to do this as a thrower, because that's kind of my natural my natural state of being is as a thrower. But picking is exactly the same thing, except that you're holding your yarn in your left hand. So here we go. Now I have just finished a row of the light color here, and we are going to go do this little pattern here with, which ends up looking like a little dot. It's kind of funny on a grid. So the way we do this is I'm going to take my green color and I'm going to knit one and then slip one, knit one, and slip. And I'm going to keep knitting one, slipping one. Now your pattern will tell you which ones that you're slipping, which ones that you're knitting. Laura again did a fabulous tutorial a couple of weeks ago on reading charts. I highly recommend checking that one out because there was even an example of mosaic knitting and how that pops up on a pattern. So here we have row one, or well, the first row where you're actually doing something interesting, which is your right side of the work. So I knit one, slipped one the entire way. Now the trick to mosaic knitting is when you're going back, you knit the same ones you knit on the first side. You slip the same ones you slipped on the first side. So I know, not a huge trick, but that's all it is. That is how simple mosaic knitting is. So here I have green stitch, so I'm going to try not to drop my needle. And I'm going to knit the green stitch. Now, one thing you do need to remember is you don't want your slip to show on the right side. So I'm going to bring my yarn to the front, which is actually the wrong side, as you can see. And I'm going to slip that white stitch because I'm not working it. It's white. I'm holding green. I don't touch the white ones except to slip them. But I am going to knit the next green. So my yarn goes back to the back. And I'm going to knit. Then I have a white one. Bring my yarn to the front so that I can't see it on the right side. Slip that knit. Go back to the back. And knit the green. Bring my yarn to the front. Slip the white. Yarn to the back. Knit the green. Now, why am I having to bring the yarn all the time back to the, well, to the wrong side? Because if I slip with my yarn still in knitting position, we'll see it on the other side. I'll just finish this row real quick. What happens when you don't change sides? Can everyone see that? My grid is broken. Oh no, but it's not the end of the world. So as you noticed, I've got white and green on my needle, but I only ever touched the green yarn on that row, back and forth. So now I'm going to take my white yarn and I'm just going to knit across because I'm doing this part of my grid. So again, I'm using only one color at a time. Oh, and here was where I accidentally on purpose, had my float on the wrong side, or in this case on the right side, but which ends up being the wrong side since I don't want to see it. So how do I fix that? I pop it up and over and behind. So fortunately, it is kind of easy to see right away when you screw up in mosaic knitting if you're working a very simple grid pattern. So here we go. And you'll also notice something that doesn't belong because floats do not belong on the front for it to be nice and perfect. So heading back, Now, again, you can see I did the whole row with the white. And I'm going back again with just the white. So how easy was that? I'm only ever working with one color, but I'm alternating one and then the other. So it is a very logical progression. If you have just started Colourwork doing stripes, Mosaic is a very nice second step into your introduction to Colourwork, because here we go. Now we've done a whole grid of Mosaic. And shall we do our
Yeah, if you want to show the Moody Shawl.
selling point? Because that was Mosaic knitting. I mean, there's nothing else to it.
So again, the discount code tonight is color, and that will be good for 20% off site-wide. The other kit that we have is something that Nick has there on her workbench and showed a little bit earlier. That is the Moody Shawl Kit. We did that as a knit along as well, and that is available in the shop and includes the videos that we put together for that one. So, and I think you and Suzanne.
Moody Shawl. Yes, Suzanne definitely, who's not with us tonight because she's in the middle of a move, but she did design this beautiful shawl, which is the Moody Shawl. And this is a great chance to put all of these tutorials into practice, because we've got short rows, we've got Mosaic, we've got an I-cord, we've got shawls and pinning, and it's a great way to put all of these tutorials at work all together in one beautiful project, which is DK weight. So it's nice, it's a quick knit, and it's just so scrumptious. So when you do buy the kit, it comes with the pattern, the yarn, and you also get access to our the videos of the knit along that we did a few weeks ago, months ago. Oh my gosh, time flies. Where's the time gone? So you do also get access to the knit along that we have on video. Obviously, it's not going to be live, so no asking questions, but Suzanne always puts her information at the bottom of her pattern so that you can contact her if you have any questions while you are knitting this beautiful Moody shawl, which has Mosaic knitting on the edge. So again, great way to kind of introduce yourself to the technique, because it's not too mind-boggling. I mean, Mosaic is not mind-boggling just to begin with, but it can be. But it's usually pretty straightforward. And the Moody Shawl is a great way to start. So there we go. We also have the Rainbow Warrior, which Laura was telling us about earlier. So the Rainbow Warrior, which is not finished in my version, unless it's like a itty bitty shawl. Again, we just finished the knit along for this one. So when you do purchase the kit, which includes the pattern and the yarn, this one isn't a fingering weight. But again, it's a very, very simple Mosaic pattern, because it's the simplest way of doing Mosaic, which is a grid. So it's basically the same thing for 8 rows. It's a 4-row repeat that you just do over and over and over. And you also get access to the knit along videos, which we just finished. So lots of techniques on how to carry up your yarn, which we also looked at last week in our tutorial. But you also get the pattern again and the yarn. So there we go. Laura, shall we move it along to sterile, or
I also wanted to show you one more time. This is the Nightshift Shawl.
Oh, the Nightshift. I'll get there.
It's a shawl by Andrea Mallory. We did not do a knit along for that, but there is a kit which includes the pattern and the yarn. This is not the sample for that. This is the one that I knit in handspun, and you will see, oh, and Nick is holding the kit right there in those colors, but you will see that this is almost basically the grid. We have the 1x1, and then we also have a 2x2. So, and it looks like Roxanne just went ahead and popped that link in there. So if you're looking for a simple Mosaic,
she totally did.
The magic of this one is done that you have, I believe you have 5 skeins of yarn in different colors, and you work the different color patterns together. And the original was done in some color changing yarn, and I chose to do mine in the hand spun, but Roxanne's colors are gorgeous, and I actually knit that one for her, and it was super fun too, and I might have to get another one, because this was a really, really fun knit. And so it's mosaic knitting, but you also get a little bit of I-cord at the edge. So that will be another skill that you have learned. So let's switch topics slightly and go to our final color work. And this one is probably the most daunting of all the color work, of all the types of color work. But it is still totally doable. And we are talking about stranded color work. So a quite common version of stranded color work is just 2 colors. And so do you want to talk about your sweater?
No, please. I'm just showing off.
Oh, okay.
I'm just holding it up for like.
I'm going to pronounce it wrong, but this is the Snow Hide Hat by Kate Davies, and it just is worked in 2 colors of fingering weight, and it's a pretty simple snowflake pattern, and then kind of a fun decrease at the top. Hats are a great way to practice color work because they're small bits of color work that are useful for things, but they give you, you know, you're producing a finished object that you can use, but it gives you some practice on colorwork knitting, which is actually, it's called stranded because you are working with 2 colors at a time and you are pulling the strand of the unused color behind your work. So the inside of your finished object will have all this great stranding. And there are techniques where you either allow the floats as they appear, or if you have too long a distance between your stitches, sometimes you can do what's called catching the floats. And some of the things that we're showing you do not have longer floats, partially because the patterns are so small. So for instance, here, I never have more than 3 or 4 stitches. Well, I guess I do in the pink sections. I have 5 or 6 or 7 stitches in between sometimes. So that's one example. And Fair Isle is
12
colorwork sweaters. She's got the yoked colorwork sweater. And then this was kind of a labor of love. This is actually how I taught myself. I had knit a little bit of colorwork before, but I wanted to get really good at it. And so I went ahead and knit the Leftovers cowl. This is a pattern by Wendy Johnson. And I used all the leftovers in my stash to do, and I will say that as complicated as this looks, I only ever use 2 colors at once. So I'm only ever working in 2 colors, even with all the different patterns and all the different sections. So you can do this. It is not super hard once you adjust to learning it. So I am going to go ahead and spotlight Nick now, and she's going to show you a little bit about knitting color work.
Yes. I mean, I can show you just basic knitting too, but color work. Just before we go on, there is a question in the chat from Christine that she's heard of a jacquard way to do color work. We unfortunately will not have time to touch on that today because that's a little bit more advanced. We're just doing really basic stranded color work tonight. So, but it is an option for future tutorials, jacquard coloring. So here we go with just, yes, Laura.
I was going to say, someone asked if there was a Tuesday short row tutorial. There is a link to that in the chat. And then somebody asked,
there is.
It looks like Marta asked, yes, is there anything special when it comes to gauge? Most of your patterns will give you some suggested needle sizes. In general, when you're working on color work, you're going to want to go up a needle size or 2. That's just kind of a rule of thumb. You'll obviously want to swatch, but color work does tend to work up a little bit tighter. So if you have a section of the pattern, say the ribbing around the, well, I guess you'd be working on smaller needles on the ribbing of the hat. But if you're working on like a color work yoke sweater, at the top, you may be using slightly larger needles than you will on the body because your tension will be a little bit tighter when you're working multiple colors.
Unless, you know, you're like me and your tension actually goes looser.
Okay, well, most folks find it helpful to adjust their needle size by 1 or 2 sizes when they are working color work.
Absolutely, and it'll also change if you're going in the round.
versus back and forth.
Yeah. So it'll also change if you're going in the round and if you have to go back and forth. Because I've noticed that my pearl in Colourwork is much looser. So I actually use, if I'm using, I use different size tips for knit. And then on the pearl side, I actually go down 2 sizes.
Oh yeah, if you have an interchangeable needle, you
go.
can put a different tip on either side.
Yep. So if I have purling sections where I go, knit in one direction, purl in the, I use a smaller needle for the pearl, because there we go. Which is why tonight we are showing just a little sample in the round, because it is the simplest way to show stranded color work. Now this is a very simple, I've just got the word in French, which is demi. It's a 2x2, so 2 stitches, 2 rows, and just little squares. So there are different ways of holding the yarn. Now, as I've mentioned quite a few times, I'm a thrower, but I do knit color work two-handed. So it is, when I was teaching in class, I would highly recommend my students to learn the two-handed way, just because once you get into a little bit more advanced techniques where you do have to manage your floats, I find that managing floats is a lot easier when you're doing two-handed as opposed to one-handed. But that, I mean, that's just me. So there we go. Without further ado, here we go. So 2 stitches of green and 2 stitches of white. So as you can see here, I am holding the green in my right and the white in my left. So again, knit 2 and knit 2 of the white. Now, what is going to be most important in color work is managing your tension and your floats, because if you knit too tightly, you're going to squish those stitches that you just knit. You're going to squish them all up. And that ain't coming apart. So this is the most important thing to get down. This is why you want to do a little sample and really test out how to manage jumping over stitches with your working yarn without tightening everything, or without having it be really loose, because you don't want a huge loop in the back, which is also why we manage floats. So how do you do that? Practice. There's, I wish there was a magic trick to it, but as I have mentioned before, in knitting, there are very rarely magic tricks. It's just a question of practicing. Just like a baby will learn to walk before they learn to run. Well, you got to learn to, walk before you learn to run. So there we go. And practice makes perfect. We are not all Usain Bolt. So I wish I was, though. All right, so here we go. 2. Now, once you are used to it, you do find ways of just kind of separating your stitches as you go so that your floats stay approximately the right length. You do want to occasionally check and make sure, but you do kind of get a feel for it. So it's nothing too stressful. Start with a small pattern, small grid pattern that you can easily do holding the yarn in both hands, and that you don't need to manage floats. Now, Anik, what are you saying when you say manage floats? Here's what I'm saying. Say all of a sudden, I need to actually knit 8 stitches of green and then 8 stitches of white. 8 stitches is a long way to go. You want to keep your floats less than about an inch. Now, why do we talk inches instead of stitches? Because if you're working in lace weight or if you're working in fingering weight, an inch is not going to be the same number of stitches as if you're working in chunky. So about an inch. Why an inch? Because an inch is about what it takes to get a finger through it. So especially if you're knitting a yoke or something that is going to be put on, you don't want to constantly be catching your fingers in there because it's, you know, like a cat with claws and knitting. Not good. So catching floats. So if I, for example, have to go 8 stitches with the green, I'm going to catch my float about halfway. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, what I mean by the float is the white color here, because I'm not ready to use it, but I still want it to be ready to go when I do need it. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to raise. I'm just raising it up a little bit. So if I look at it this way, it's just going up a little so that when I go to knit the next stitch, you see how it's wrapping around the white? And there we go. That's all there is to it on that one. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And my float, which started way over here, floats across 4 stitches. You see it here, floats across 4 stitches, gets pinned down right here. So I've got green on either side holding it down, and then it's ready to use. Now, if I need to pin in the white, remember these are recorded, so you can go back and see how I did that again, because we are almost out of time. So I'm just going to do this very quickly. So if you need to pin down the color that you're using in your right hand, and you are currently knitting with the color in your left hand, it's a little bit more complicated, but really watch the video, rewind, watch it again, you'll be good to go. Step 1, I'm going to pass the yarn that I want to pin down as if I'm going to knit, but I haven't knit anything yet. It's just kind of sitting there. So I've already inserted my needle to knit. I'm going to pass the yarn that I want to pin down around the needle as if to knit. Then I'm also going to pass my working yarn, so the white, as if to knit. But then I'm going to take my green yarn and unwrap it. And what happens is that, if you can see here, my green yarn has been pinned behind the white yarn. Now, how do I keep that from popping through? Give it a little tug in the back. That's all it is. So what is that going to look like on the front? Big ol' nothing. But my green yarn is ready to go. So once again, if I need to pin the white, I'm simply going to hold up, knit around it, and then bring it back down, out of the way. And if I need to pin the green while I'm knitting the white, I'm going to insert as if to knit, wrap as if to knit, wrap as if to knit with my working yarn, unwrap with the non-working yarn, the one I'm just carrying, and complete my stitch. And there we go. One little tip before we go. I haven't been looking at the chat, hopefully not too many questions. One little tip before we go. Make sure that you always carry the same color in the same hand. I think if there's one tip that you really need to pay attention to, is you always want to carry the color. Make a note on your pattern when you write in your colors, if you're not using the colors in the pattern. If you are, like for example, if I was using this, I would say main color is green, contrast color is white. In my pattern, I would actually write in main color right, contrast color left. Why? Because no matter how good of a knitter you are going to have the tiniest little gauge difference between your right and your left, especially if one of those two is a new technique. What that's going to do, especially on a repetitive pattern, is it's going to cause your knitting to either the white to kind of almost pop up a little bit more than the green, or the green to pop up a little bit more than the white. So in order to mitigate that effect, which is subtle, but once you're looking at your finished object will be very obvious, always carry the same color in the same hand. Now, doesn't matter if it's your contrast color or your main color, whichever one you're most comfortable with, put in the most comfortable hand. That there's no, there's nothing to it other than that. So yeah, there we go. That was stranded knitting. There's not much more to it than that. You can hold both your yarns. Laura was saying you can hold both your yarns in the same hand, but I highly recommend using both. Plus, it's way more fun.
Okay, so not that we can cover even, I mean, we could spend 3 months just on Colourwork on Tutorial Tuesdays, but we tried to give you a little bit of an intro. Remember that the discount code is COLOR, and that will be good for 48 hours from tonight. 20% off any of the kits we shared, any yarn, any grab bags. Next month, June is going to be celebrating brioche. So we have a bunch of brioche tutorials coming up with Anik, and Suzanne will be back. And we also have a special guest. I won't be here, but I will be replaced by a special guest who will be working brioche with you. Our next session for next Tuesday will be one color brioche, and Roxanne added a link in the chat for that one. We hope you'll join us for that. Did I miss anything? Is there anything else you've got, Nick?
No, just remember for any Canadians amongst you, COLOR, the code word for checkout discount is the American way of spelling it, not the Canadian way. So no you.
It's funny because we were having that discussion before because I'm American, but of course Nick and Roxanne are Canadian. So enjoy, have a wonderful evening, happy shopping, and we will see you next week. Good night.